I guess I'll just start with now I will start. I guess I'll start with a bit of an introduction for myself. So, hi everyone, my name's Lauren Robinson. I'm a podcast host here at SuperPOSITRON Toronto. I'm an incoming grade 11 student from Oakville, and I love things related to like biology and genetics. I don't know if you guys heard me, but I'm interested in biomedical engineering and that sort of field of STEM, among other things. I think STEM is so interesting. It would honestly be impossible for me to choose. And I'm also really interested in coding and user interface and like UI and UX and that type of thing. I just went to the workshop. If anyone here attended it, it was super great. All right, but enough about me. We are here because we have an absolutely incredible guest, Ariel Lamb. And so, Ariel, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, just as a brief introduction for everyone here?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Ariel. I'm currently in my fourth year of software engineering at the University of Waterloo. And yeah, I've done a lot of experience with engineering internships, like as well as like work experience, school experience in mobile development. So like some of the things I've done at work is I worked for a company that did like a music player app, which was really cool. I've also worked at another company that did like a games mobile app. And so I've like worked with a bunch of like different size companies over a bunch of different fields. Most recently, I've been at Apple for the past two of my internships, and I'll be going back in the fall. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. On my free time, I used to be a pretty frequent hackathon attendee. So I think like I've been to over like 5 hackathons, I think like 6 or 7 or so. And so yeah, I one of the ones I've been to is Hack North, which was super awesome. And one of my app that I did there was this like watch app, and we won first place, which was like super awesome. It was like a super cool experience. So I have a lot of experience in like lots of different areas, and as well, I've done some volunteering with Canada Learning Code, and that's some of the things that I do in my free time. In addition to like drawing and also listening to music. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I saw your project for Hack the North 2019. What an incredible idea. I would use that so often. If I always forget my rep. For people who don't know, I guess you can speak to this, but it was an absolutely incredible project. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into coding in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, when I was a little kid, so I'm from Vancouver, so I grew up like basically like kind of near UBC. And so some of the things I did as a kid was like a lot of like robotics camps, and there was this special program at UBC for like the kids' summer camps that was like girls only. So they had one week that was just girls only, and so I used to go to those, and I thought they were super fun because it'd be like, wow, there's a bunch of other girls who are all just also interested in tech. So like one of my first coding experiences was with like Lego Mindstorms, which is like basically the Lego robots that you can like program like really easily on a computer. It's like drag and drop. So that was some of the first things I did. In addition to that, I also as a kid, I'd make like these websites for like this like pet site I went on. Think like Neopets. So I'd like make websites for people using HTML and CSS in exchange for like in-game currency. And so that was kind of like the gateway of me like, oh, I can like learn how to code through this. And so I like would look up tutorials online of how to like make websites, how to like make like layouts and like put images on my page. And I found that was like a super cool way to like get into coding as a little kid. But yeah.
That is incredible. That is the best answer I was hoping. Oh, that's awesome. So I guess like through those experiences, you realized that it was something that you wanted to pursue further, and obviously you have, and you were quite successful at it. So that is incredible. Thank you for sharing. So, introductions aside, I guess we can get into some of the larger questions. Also, if you're in the audience and you would like to ask Ariel a question, please pop it in the chat. We will try our very best to get to it. Hopefully some of the questions I'm asking today kind of cover your interests, and if not, feel free to type them in the chat. So I guess kind of like the first block of questions I have for you is about your hackathon experience, seeing as this is a hackathon. So can you talk to us about your experience at Hack the North? Kind of like, what was it like? Were there any major setbacks or challenges that you overcame, and what was it like?
Yeah, for sure. I guess I start from the beginning, I guess. So yeah, I applied to Hack the North back in I think I went in 2018. And so one of the first things is obviously filling out the application, and finding teammates. And so once I got in, I think like that was one of the big challenges I think at first was like finding people to be on a team with. So I knew like one of my friends in my program in software engineering, who was on my team. She said she knew someone else, and then once we got to the hackathon at Waterloo, we found another teammate. So we had a team of four, and I knew like only knew one person on my team and didn't know the other two. And so it was interesting because we also had all of like very different work experiences of what types of like development we've worked on. So two of my team members were more like worked on more like backend stuff. One of my team members did more like web development and like front end work. And then I was kind of in a role that was more like I had hackathon experience before, and as well like I had like mobile development experience and also like some web stuff. And so yeah, like going into the hackathon, like we didn't have any idea of what to do, and so we were just kind of like, we're just here to like kind of have fun and like kind of like look at new technologies to like explore with. And I think like I've gone into most of my hackathon experiences just being like, I'm here to have fun. And like whatever outcome that happens, it's not a big deal. I will like be gaining some experience out of it. And so yeah, when I showed up to Hack North, we were just like thinking of ideas. And I feel like the first like few hours of a hackathon is usually like after opening ceremonies, you're just like thinking of ideas. And it's like you can't think of ideas in the next like 4 or 5 hours after that. It's like you can also just if it's nighttime, like what we did, we like went back home since I was living in Waterloo at the time. I just like went back to my apartment, slept, came back, and we continued the hackathon. And like we thought of ideas like in the morning, I remember, and we were thinking about like, oh, like I had my Apple Watch on. We were thinking about, oh, would it be cool if we did like a hardware hack or like something with like some kind of hardware peripheral. And so at Hack North, there's basically like a hardware lab where you can like take out stuff, and like rent it out for the hackathon duration. They have like stuff like I think like VR headsets, like a lot of like Fitbits, which is what we use. They also have like other peripherals such as like the sensing headbands that can like tell your like EKG brainwaves. It's like really cool stuff. So like
Yeah.
one of the things that was left at the lab since we like took them out pretty last minute was the watch. And so we're like, oh, okay, we can just use the watch. And so we were talking about like all sorts of different ideas. We were thinking like a Tamagotchi pet for your watch, but we were like, that really doesn't have a practical application, but it seems cool. And we were just kind of talking about it. And one of the ideas that we thought of was like, oh, we could build something that could help people work out because like I had recently started working out like that term. So I was like, oh yeah, I've been going to the gym kind of and like trying to do like some like reps and stuff and like try to find workout patterns. But what would be cool if like we could use the sensor in the watch to detect like when you've completed a rep, so you don't have to count them yourself, but like count them in your head. And so we were like, that seems like a cool idea. And so we looked into more of the technology with the Fitbit and trying to expose like how to get like the sensing properties from the watch. And just like it was kind of hard to like figure out how to use it. I think the Fitbit interface wasn't very intuitive and there wasn't a lot of documentation, which can happen sometimes with like new products or like developing for things that aren't super consumer heavy. And so we were like, we don't know how to use this. And we spent a lot of time getting it to work. But eventually we figured it out. And I think like from there, we were trying to figure out as well, like how we wanted to market our like product that we had and like counting like the reps as like more of like a consumer kind of thing. And so like making like a pitch around it and like kind of like a business idea, which I worked a lot on. So we like basically propositioned it as like you would be able to count your stats on your watch, and as well like we would send that to like a dashboard like on your computer that you could like log into and like see all your reps for the week and like different activities that you've done, like all in one view. And so like we basically went with that, and we were like trying to figure out how to get the data from the watch into like Google Firebase, which was like where our database was. And there's like a lot of work behind that. I think like a lot of challenges came up with like, oh, nothing's working right now. And then like we'd have to work on it for like an hour or so and then be like, oh, it finally works now. But yeah, like there were a lot of difficulties. I think like once the one kind of funny thing is that like so we presented at the end of the hackathon, we had our finished product. We like pitched to the judges, and we had our pitch, and then we walked out of the room. And we were like, oh, everyone behind us in like line in the room had like crazy like ML projects or like crazy like other ideas, and we were like, oh, we're not gonna win, it's fine. Let's like return our hardware and like go back, and just like maybe not go to closing ceremonies. And then they ended up calling us, and they were like, you're a finalist and you won basically, so you need to come and show up at like closing ceremonies right now. We had like returned the watch. We didn't know which watch was ours because like they put them all in a big pile. So we had to go find the watch and like re-upload our project so we can present. So yeah, it worked out though because we ended up presenting and we weren't late. Maybe like a little bit late, but it was pretty fun in the end. But yeah, that was like my Hack the North experience.
Oh my gosh, that is an incredible story. I mean, I know
Yeah.
personally that's such a great idea. Yeah, for those of you who weren't here in the very beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, that is something I would use. So props to you and props to your group. And I also really loved how you mentioned kind of like how everyone on your team had a bit of a different background and you all work together. And I think that's something that's so great about STEM and especially coding, because there's so many aspects to creating a coding project. There's front end, back end, all of these. I know I only mentioned two, but there's a lot. There's
Right.
a lot to it. But yeah, and we're hoping that's what a lot of the participants at our own hackathon take away from here. Meeting new people, networking, and also learning to collaborate and learning from other types of coders. And that's really, really what like the fun takeaways are, at least in my experience. I mean, so
For sure, yeah.
working on cool oh my gosh, projects like Lift and Describe and Giving Tree and all these things. And also, if you guys, anyone in the audience, you should definitely check out some of her projects. They're absolutely insane. They're so cool. What has been your favorite project to work on and why?
Yeah, I think, yeah, out of all the projects, I guess like on my kind of project thing, I definitely think like it's probably been my Hack the North project. I think it was like kind of like a chaotic environment of just like us trying to like finish our product and like trying to think of like what to do. I think that usually is how it comes with hackathons. But I think one really cool thing about Hack the North is that like that was the first time I really worked with like any like hardware hacks. And so like doing things on like a physical watch or like actually having like the device and like testing it out with like we basically use like the gyroscope sensor, which is basically you have to like move it around and it like detects the position of where your arm is. And with that, it's like that's like really cool because it's like in real life and it's a little bit different than like, oh, I'm making like a web page that you can see on your computer. It's like kind of like cool, like um, real life application that like is kind of hard to see in like when you're in like your computer science classes or your like ECE classes. That knowledge isn't really applied because like a lot of the labs that I do are just like, oh, code this program that will run. And then you'll have some output and then that's it. And so like I think that experience was super cool in that way. I think as well, I kind of stepped out of my comfort zone with like doing more things that weren't just like, oh, just like mobile development or doing like design. Also working on like the business pitch aspect of it was something that I hadn't really done. I like enjoy public speaking, like and talking to like groups or like sharing my experiences. But like pitching like an actual project and like doing like a 2-minute elevator pitch was like something I'd like never done before. And it was like kind of nerve wracking. I'd like done it at a previous hackathon, but it wasn't like exactly the same because this was like kind of like higher stakes. I think because it's such like a big event. And so yeah, I think definitely Lyft was like a pretty cool project that I really enjoyed. Yeah, I think I really am proud of it because I really like the way it looked. And like all the different like color schemes we had and like the presentation we had. And like our demo was super cool, I think. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that like working on projects that almost like push you outside of your comfort zone a little bit are the most exciting because not only are you creating something that you're proud of, but you also get to grow not only as a coder but as a person because now you have kind of these cool new skill sets that you can apply to other things. And kind of in that same vein, having had such a great experience at Hack the North, like winning Hack the North and going through all these setbacks and meeting a new team and trying something new with like a hardware hack, what are some key takeaways that you always kind of bring with you when you're going to hackathons, that you would like to share with our hackers here, because this is a hackathon and I'm sure they're all very eager
Yeah.
to.
For sure, yeah. I definitely think there's a few takeaways that are pretty prominent throughout my other hackathon experiences, and not just Hack the North. I think like first one is like don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think like winning is great, but I think there's is also like you want to take something out of the hackathon, is you want to like gain some kind of skill, or like some kind of connections or some like new friends that you meet through your team, or not even through your team, just like through activities that you do. I think those connections and like those like experiences that you have are way more important than winning, because like in when it comes down to like personal growth, I think if you worked on a project that you're pretty proud of and that you like put a lot of effort into, that really makes a big difference in like when you're thinking of using your hackathon experience for like on your resume or for like job applications and stuff. And so those are like, that's I think like getting takeaways and not being too focused on winning is like pretty important. Another thing is like um, be aware that things might not always go your way. So like if you're working on a project, and like you're trying to like debug something and it's just not working and like your demo's approaching, sometimes like no matter how hard you try, it might just not work. I've had that happen before. One of the hackathons I went to, I think it was U of T hacks. We were trying to figure out why our project wasn't working. And in the end, like we couldn't get to work. So we did the best we could and just like tried to make some kind of like pseudo like mock-up that would be like, this is what our project would look like if it was working, even though it worked like 3 hours ago. Which I think like when situations like that arise, I think that's another great thing about hackathons is like having that kind of like ability to if things go wrong, having the ability to like problem solve and like think of alternatives is like really important. I think is a good skill to bring, so you don't get like stuck in like a hole of like, oh, I'm trying to fix this certain thing and like it's not going anywhere. Sometimes you got to just like switch your mindset and be like, maybe there's like another way we could do it that we could still showcase what our product wants to be or what our project wants to be, but like not actually necessarily have all the implementation details if that isn't possible. And that's like totally acceptable as well. So yeah, I guess that's like two takeaways for hackathons.
Yeah, no, that's definitely like I know as someone I've only participated in one hackathon, but I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think having those experiences and meeting new people, but also kind of like learning to think on your feet a little bit and compromise and adapt when things go wrong. It's very, very useful skills to have. And I guess in that same like vein of questioning, do you find those skills like applicable to your schooling or your internships, or is it kind of something that like once you leave the hackathon, you're like, all right, no more?
Yeah, I definitely think it's like super applicable. I think throughout your whole career and also in school, you'll be working with teams a lot, and these teams might not be people that you choose. It could be like you're applying for a job, and you get placed on a team and you don't know who you're working with, but it just turns out you have to work with them. In those situations, I think like hackathon experience of just like finding new people to work with, or just like working on like technical projects in a group, that's where the experience really comes in handy. So like right now, in school in fourth year, we have like this fourth year design project, and I'm working with a bunch of my friends on it. And I think like a lot of the skills through like problem solving and like debugging and like walking people through your code, like a lot of things that like I've done in hackathons are really applicable to like group projects in school like that. On the other hand, with like internships, yeah, like when you're working on a team, I think it's like super important to like know how to like even like at work. I think like you'll for me, like my internships, I found times where I've had to like present my projects. And I have to like pitch it basically to like whoever I'm presenting to. It could be like my manager, like my team, like anyone whoever it might be. Like I've used my hackathon skills from like presenting my project to like apply that to work. So it's like really, I think like hackathons are kind of like a microcosm, like tiny little like simulation of like what kind of the real world is, because it's kind of like in that enclosed environment and you only have this like short amount of time. Whereas like in the greater world, it's like you're going to be working on projects for like over several months or like over even over years. And I think like those skills that you get in a hackathon, especially if you're like in high school or like in like very early in like your university degree, are like super helpful and are like will really bring you forward, if compared to like other people who don't necessarily have that like practical experience.
Mhm. And that's so awesome. Did you hear that, everyone in the hackathon? Everyone, great. You're going to be learning great skills for all of your internships. I guess kind of along the lines of internships. So you've interned at places like Apple, Inkling, Bunch, Treble Scale, and RBC, just to name a few. So could you talk us through the process of like how internships work at your school through co-op and kind of how you got at such kind of prestigious places?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, with Waterloo's program, if you guys aren't familiar with it, basically how it works is that like all engineering programs at Waterloo, so I'm in software engineering, which is part of the engineering faculty. All engineering programs have a co-op program. If you are in like CS or like math, there's also co-op programs, but some of them are optional. So for me, I have to do internships basically every other school term. And so like for the first year, you attend school in fall, and then the winter of that year or of the same school year, you'll start applying for internships. And so how it works with Waterloo system, is they have like an internal job board basically that you can like send out your application to. And so you like upload like your resume. I think it also uploads with like your grade transcript and just more information about you. You can add a cover letter. And so like you basically do like you get an entire list of all these jobs, and it takes like one click to apply to these jobs, which is like pretty simple. And like the process, I think, is like that's the one great thing about Waterloo, is that like I think Waterloo attracts a lot of the employers rather than you having to go out and seek other companies out in like the wild and like cold messaging people, which is always like a very scary thing. Waterloo kind of simplifies that process by having a bunch of like startups and larger companies, like companies from the States. They all like come to Waterloo's job board to like add their jobs so students can apply to them. And so yeah, like through my experiences, I've gotten, I think, most of my jobs through Waterloo Works. My first, I think, yeah, like 4 jobs or so, I've gotten through the system. And so basically, like you get chosen for interviews, and you interview with a bunch of companies, and there comes a day where they stop the interviews, and you have to decide based on if companies give you offers or they give you ranks, which is like they can rank you from 1 to 10 and how much they want you if they don't have an offer for you. And so if someone else declines their offer, it might go to you, the offer, and so you could have a job. But yeah, so like through that system, I think like it's really nice because a lot of jobs, basically it's like a normal job posting. They post like what kind of work you're doing, what kind of position it is, what like kind of engineering, like there's mobile, there's front end, back end, like there's tons of different types. And so it's really helpful, like I think in first year, I think like most students apply to just like a lot of jobs, but when you get to like the upper years, you can like kind of pick and choose like, oh, I want to apply to this job because I want to do like mobile development and like kind of like specialize like that. Um, and yeah, so my first few jobs I've gone through like the water system. On the other hand of things is I've been to this conference called Grace Hopper Celebration. If you've heard of it before, it's basically a conference for women in technology. And they usually hold it in person, like in Florida or Texas. But obviously, because of COVID, it's been online for the past like 2 years or so. So yeah, I actually got my Apple job through Grace Hopper. And so they actually have like a bunch of student recruiting for internships for like the summer internship positions. So the conference is held in like October or September of the year before. And so I was able to get my internship and interview actually at the conference with Apple, which was like a super awesome experience. And so that's how I got my like first Apple position. And from there, like I've talked to like teams like within the company and like gotten my like next internship positions from there. So yeah, I think like it's definitely Waterloo has a pretty good network for getting jobs, but I think like even like outside of that, like Grace Hopper has been like a super awesome opportunity for me to talk to more employers, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, co-ops sound like a great opportunity, not only just to get more like hands-on work experience, but also just to go through the process of like applying and interviewing and kind of get like
Hmm.
a little sample of what it's like out there in the real world. So,
Right.
having interned at so many cool places, how do you make the most out of your tech internship?
Yeah, I think um, with like all my internships, I think for me, I think one of the things that I really try to do is like try to have an impact at the company. However that may be, that might be small, that might be larger, or just like make sure that like you're leaving an impact and like doing work that you think is meaningful. In addition to you want the company to provide you with an opportunity that will strengthen your future career and like the goals that you want to meet. So I think the best internships that I've had have been ones where my manager or like my mentor, whoever it is, who's like supervising me, like first like week or so or like first like month, they usually would ask like what do you want to get out of your co-op, or like what things do you want to try, what like technologies do you want to work with, what's like one thing you want to like meet as like a goal for yourself and for like your personal work development. And so this has ranged from like, oh, I want to like ship out a product that will like be used by a bunch of customers, or like I want to work on a feature that will like be eventually in the app at some point. And so yeah, like I think those are like kind of things I really like value when I'm going to a tech internship. In addition to that, I think it's really important to like get connections with people. So like sometimes you'll be at a company with like other interns and like you'll have like intern events or like intern socials. And those are like awesome opportunities because you'll meet people maybe not from your school, maybe they are from your school. I think if you go to Waterloo, you'll meet a lot of other Waterloo interns because we're all interning at the same time. But like you'll definitely meet like a lot of people with like new perspectives or new experiences that you haven't heard of before. And it's also great to build up like your just like intern network, because by meeting other interns, they're eventually going to work at other companies. And if you ever want to hear what other companies are like, I think like talking to your like intern friends is like always a great idea. But yeah, like I think that's like one side of networking. in a company as well, like I think it's really important to talk to like full-time employees, because like I think like especially for me, and then when you get older, in like third or fourth year, you're really going to be thinking about where do I want to work like post graduation. I think like tech is pretty like standard, and like once you graduate, you'll probably like be signed to like a full-time job with like whatever company you've interned with before, or even like do more recruiting. And I think like talking to full-time employees and hearing their experiences are really important, to see like, is this company a good fit for me? Like, would I like it here in the future? Or like, what's the culture like? And I think like, especially with COVID and things being remote, like I really tried to reach out to like people, like my previous internships during the pandemic, and like just like do like coffee chats or like one-on-ones like every so often, and to just like talk to people about their experiences. And I think it's cool because with companies, like, yeah, especially with the full times, I think it's like they'll have a lot of different experiences. Like I at Apple, I'm working on a pretty like international team, because I'm in localization, and so like a lot of my coworkers are all like from like all over the place, like coworkers from France, coworkers from Mexico, like a lot of coworkers from the States, obviously. And so like I've talked to them about like their experiences and their like education and like where they worked, and it's like been all over the board, and it's like really cool to just see what's beyond like the scope of just like the university, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are a lot of great takeaways, and honestly,
Yeah.
like I really hope to do a co-op too after hearing that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many benefits, like on a personal level, on so many networking levels, and just I think it's really important, especially like you mentioned in the tech industry, like what are the actual employees saying? Because it's one thing when a company like treats their interns a certain way, and then
Mhm.
it's another thing if they treat their actual full-time employees another way. So it's a great
Right.
kind of way to like really see like what's going on. I love
Mm.
that. And I guess kind of like a follow-up question to that would be once you've like completed an internship, and this is something that I've always wondered myself, how does that compare with like what you've been learning in the classroom? Do you feel like what you've been learning in the classroom actually applies to like real world modern issues that you might be working at an internship?
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like this is a pretty like hot question, I think, because I feel personally, school. I don't know if you're feeling this in high school as well, but I think school really doesn't reflect like what's going on like outside of it, in terms of like the tech world and like kind of like things you do in like courses like with computer science. I think it's a big difference between like having like work experience knowledge, and knowing like, oh, like how to like write code on like a team setting with like GitHub, version control. It's like a whole other different scope rather than like at school you're learning more like fundamentals, like data structures or like algorithms. Like I took a course on concurrency, and I'm like, this isn't really applicable to me a lot as an iOS developer, but sometimes it is. And so like I think like it's definitely there's a big gap between what I learn at school, which is basically like I think if it was a Venn diagram, the circles are like not overlapping at all. Like maybe a tiny, tiny bit in the middle, but it's like I really think that like there's some courses that I think some courses that are really applicable. Like for example, I think like I took a human computer interaction course, which was super awesome. That's like a lot of design and like a lot of like how to do user interviews and like prototyping and like doing high fidelity mockups. And that's pretty useful skills as I think like as like an intern, if like you're working on a project that requires you to like design a feature. I find that has been one of the more applicable things, but that was obviously a course I took this semester, which was like way into my degree. I'm in my fourth year. But like a lot of like the first year courses I took were all like fundamentals. And as an engineer, because I'm in software engineering, we actually have to take like physics. So we have to take two terms of physics, which is like I never use physics at my job. And I just took it, and I'm like, this does not apply to me at all, ever. Same thing with like circuits. It's like I am a software engineer working on a mobile app. It's not really applicable to me. And so I think the overlap is really not a lot. And that's why I think like definitely for the future. And it's like interesting to think about it because it's like you're in school for 4 years, but like I think the most I'm gaining out of my school experience is like the stuff that isn't even school. It's like the internships that I've been doing. Because once I graduate, I'll be like working full time, which is like more akin to like internships rather than school. And I think like definitely for some people in co-op programs at Waterloo, they go on to do like graduate degrees, like master's degrees or like PhDs, and like that's like a little more uncommon than like going straight into industry, but it does happen. And so I feel like in that case, I think like your courses are really preparing you for that. But obviously in academia, I think it's like very big disconnect between that and the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of students relate to that, just having like, taking these courses and then doing hackathons or doing these projects, and you're like, where's the overlap? I love the Venn diagram analogy because I
Yeah.
relate to that. So I guess kind of in a different vein of questioning, as a software engineer, this industry can often be quite competitive with a lot of people, wanting to create such incredible things, and especially being at a competitive school like Waterloo. How do you almost stay motivated as a software engineer? And if you feel comfortable talking about like mental health struggles that you've encountered along the way in terms of dealing with that motivation.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I think in first year, I definitely felt like there were some points in my degree where I'm like, oh, I don't feel like I'm like good enough for like software engineering because like, oh, all my like friends are like classmates are like getting these like super cool internships, and I'm like, oh, like I'm just chilling, like I like have like I'm working at like a startup, like I it's not like the I think with Waterloo especially the culture is like very competitive, because everyone talks to each other, everyone knows each other, like especially like in your if you're in a program that's smaller, like everyone is like sharing their like, oh, starting work at this place on like LinkedIn or whatever. And it's like you see a lot of that, and I feel like sometimes it just gets like pretty toxic to like keep comparing yourself to other people, which is what I did a lot in first year. And then I came to a point, I think I just like realized I'm like, I think like the experiences that I've had, even though they're not like compared to like other people, they may be different or maybe they may be at different companies. The experiences I've had, I think, are like still valid enough to like I think I have achieved a lot in like my internships and like in the work that I've done. And I feel like it's really just like it's kind of like a mindset shift. It's hard to explain, but I kind of like got to a point where it's like, okay, this like behavior needs to stop. That I can't like keep thinking like, oh, like I'm less important than someone else because of my internships, because that's like a terrible way to think of like how much you're worth and like how many things you've like achieved. So yeah, I definitely think I stopped thinking in this kind of like mindset of like, oh, like comparing myself to others and just being like, oh, I'm really happy with like internships that I had, and like I worked on like really cool teams and I met really cool people. And like through that, I think like I even like gained more confidence in like when I went to like internships, because I'd be like more proud to talk about my experiences working at certain companies. And yeah, I definitely think like keeping up with like the like competitive atmosphere of Waterloo, I think it also is really important like the kinds of people you surround yourself with and like the friends you have.
Mhm.
Because I know there's some people in my class who like or some people in my class are like some people like outside of my class or just people at Waterloo in general who may like perpetuate that stereotype of just like being like always on like the grind set kind of thing or just being like, oh, like I'm like working super hard in my career like and sacrificing like other stuff for that. But I personally think like there's like kind of also a line between um like I have a personal life and like I really value like my personal time with my friends and like hanging out with people I like, versus like really like doing like career prep and like working on like leak code questions and like trying to really like grind for that like job. And I think like there's definitely like a balance that I think everyone has like a personal like boundary that they have to reach between how much time you want to spend on like doing like career prep and stuff versus like how much you want to like dedicate towards like doing stuff you enjoy, such as like I really like to draw and stuff, so like I always try to make time for that, whether it be during school or work, and just having that like free time to myself. um yeah, I definitely think there's like definitely good ways to mitigate like stress around like internships and stuff, and I think it really just comes from like having the mindset of like being like positive about your situation and like knowing that like your accomplishments are super valid, and like no one else can tell you that otherwise, because you're the only one in the end that can like determine like how you feel about what kind of jobs you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is honestly, I love when people like echo that message. Like it's such a mindset thing. It's
Mhm.
you really can't determine your worth off of like the places you've been or internships that you end up doing, because you're so much more than that. Experience is experience, and if you're trying your best and you're trying to actively work towards your goals, then I think in the end that's like all that really matters. And especially with
Mhm.
like surrounding yourself with the people not only that like share interests as you but support you as a person, and not just as whatever major you may be. You're
Right.
a person at the end of the day. They have to support your growth, and I thank you for sharing that with us. And I guess
Yeah.
kind of in that same vein, when you first like came to university as a software engineering student, were there any like, and now that you're in your fourth year, were there any like kind of misconceptions you had that were completely like false? You're like, oh my gosh, that is not what I was expecting at all. What I have been lied to, and if so, what were they?
Yeah, that's a fun question actually. I gotta think about it a little bit. I guess like one kind of I think it's kind of expected, I think one thing. Kind of like backstory to this. So I actually went to a girls' school for elementary school and high school. So like basically my whole life I was been like all girls. And I show up to the program and obviously with software engineering, the statistics are there. It's mostly guys. So I showed up and I was like, there's not that many girls here. And I feel like it wasn't really much of like I kind of expected it, but it was also kind of a big shock at the same time. Like because I came from such a like a supportive environment of like all girls, and I'm like I get to this program, I'm like, oh, this is kind of different. I think that's one, I guess, like big thing that was a big change for me. I think another thing was definitely like knowing how to like spend your time wisely, I think was another big shock because I think like with like high school, like I'd be at home, my parents would be like, do your homework, Ariel, and I'd be like, okay, and I like do homework from like 5 to 10. But like with university, you have like because I'm from BC, so like moving all the way to Waterloo, that's like across the country. My parents are no longer in my vicinity, and now I'm living away from home. I like had so much more free time in my hands because I was like, oh, now I can like actually hang out with my friends instead of like studying all day. And so obviously this like leads to some bad study habits and like bad time management. But like I definitely think like that was one thing is like I really needed to work on managing my time by myself instead of just being like, oh, I get home from school after like extracurriculars or whatever at like 5, and I just do homework. It was like more like I had class from like let's say like I think it was like 8 to like 4, and then I had like a break, and then I had class like later in the day. But like during that break, I'm like maybe I should have been doing homework, but like I'd be like hanging out with my friends or something. And it'd just be like, oh, this is like I saw it reflected in like my grades, and I got assignments back, and I'm like, oh, I really don't know how to do this. Or I like start my assignment the night before, and I'd be like, whoops, that was not a good idea. And I think like that's kind of a big surprise. I think coming from like high school, I think I also got hit with like senioritis in like grade 12, like third term. And I was like, oh, I'm really lazy now. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that like I realized I'm like, oh, I need to get on my case about this and like whip myself into shape and just be like, hey, I need to start working on how to manage my time wisely and like putting everything in a calendar and like figuring out all the things I need to do. So yeah, I think that was like the two major shockers going into university.
Yeah, I think definitely like I know if I move out for university, it's going to be a challenge for me because my life is like has been very structured, growing up with my parents around and things like that.
Mm.
So once I get there, I think Google Calendar is going to be a great friend of mine.
Yep, totally.
um,
Yep.
so you mentioned obviously coming into an industry that is very male dominated. Um, what has your experience been like on like a more personal level or more like academic level, whatever you feel comfortable sharing with, as a woman in this field? Do you find it's like it's harder to be a woman in the field? Do you think that's like a myth? Like what's your experience with it?
Yeah, I definitely think being a woman in tech, I think comes with I think it's just like I in the workplaces I've been in, I think like a lot of the time I do feel like I'm part of the team and everyone's like very friendly and accepting. Like I don't feel like I'm treated like any different from like any other employee there. But it is, I think like I think this happens more often than not where it's not like very like prominent things or incidents or like things that people will say, but it's more like kind of like smaller like microaggressions that might happen. For example, like I've had experience where I was at the workplace, and one of my coworkers was like, "Oh, like wow, Ariel, like you dress super nice, like in the office. Like there's some like girl engineers who just dress like in like a hoodie and t-shirt." And I'm like, that's kind of I don't know how that is to like put other people down like that because just because they don't dress nice. And I'm like, I don't know how to take this compliment. I'm like, is it a compliment? Is this like a is this just a comment? But yeah, I think like it's a lot of incidents like that where it's kind of like offhanded things that I've heard like from my coworkers. They're just like kind of like it's I do feel you feel like you're the only girl in the room sometimes, but like it comes to a point where it's like that's kind of like the normal, I think. Where it's like I think I'm still like part of the team and like everyone's like here, and like we're all like having like a great like working environment. It's just like small things like that like guys will say and they don't really notice, and it's like really like hard to like be in the position of like to correct someone and be like, oh, that's not a super good thing to say, because I think like especially like as an intern and I'm like, oh, I just joined the company, it's kind of like I don't know if this is my place to say it, which is I think something that like I think I can definitely work on. But I definitely think like in the workforce it has been like a pretty positive experience for me. On the other hand of things, I think with school, I think there have been incidents, not particularly for me, but like around where have heard cases of like male students saying bad things about female students related to their gender, which is not like the most positive thing, but I think like it does happen, and I think it's really one thing for these things to happen, incidents to happen, but it's another thing for like people to recognize like why what they said is wrong, and it's like it's definitely like a touchy subject because some guys will just like not know, oh, like that's not something that they should say, or like they've never experienced this before, or like any like overt like sexism or any like areas or any issues or like related to that kind of like experiences, because they just haven't had them, and it's really hard to like tell someone like, oh, this is like something that women face, when it's like you can't really like explicitly tell them, or like explicitly kind of like show like, oh, this is like something like small that someone said, that is like kind of annoying, and then sometimes the response might be they just don't understand, but I think it really, I think like my experiences have been fairly positive, but I think it's always I think like a small worry that like something might happen, but overall I think like I know like what things are right and what things are wrong. I think that's really important to establish, like especially when you're working in like a male dominated field for sure.
Exactly, and oftentimes it's almost like the backhanded compliments, like, "Oh, you got that really fast for a girl," like, "Wow,"
Hmm.
like and they think it's a compliment and it's really not, and it's kind of hard to be like, "How do I tell you?" Like, because they don't necessarily have, like, wrong intentions, but they just said something
Right.
hurtful, and it's like, how do I confront that? And I guess my next question was, like, how do you face discrimination when in the workforce? Like, do you find yourself like standing up for yourself or standing up for others? And if not, like, is that because obviously, is that because you don't feel comfortable because of other male coworkers, or like what is happening in those situations?
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think in situations like this, in like my experience, yeah, like what I mentioned before, like that hasn't been anything like super major, but I think like it's something that I need to work on to like recognize that, oh, in the moment when situations like that arise, where it's like just an offhanded comment, to like actually go out of the way to correct them, because I think like if you kind of just let it slide, then it's not necessarily then like what you said, Lauren, like I think it's like they just don't realize, and it's kind of like part of like the language, because I think there's a lot of things adapted from like everyday language, like boys will be boys kind of thing. I think like things like that, like kind of idioms like those kind of sayings have like always been around, and I think it's like we really need to work to like get them out of like our vocabulary, and I think definitely like when it comes to like kind of comments like that, like I really want to work on um being like, hey, like that's not a super great thing to say, if that does arise. But yeah, like so far I think especially because like I haven't had a lot of like face-to-face interaction with anyone in a while, because like all my internships have been like pretty remote, like everything's been like great, but I think like if that does happen, like even at school, in the workplace, like anywhere, I think like I definitely want to like take more action and being like, hey, like that's not a great thing to say. And I think it's just like that's like one way of like kind of really like affirmative action. I think another way is like having like the ability to like educate like male coworkers and like anyone who falls into those categories, like about like the importance of like inclusive language, for example, and like knowing what kind of statements are more like gender coded. I had one of my managers, he actually sent me this article from this like course he took about like gender coded language, and like how certain phrases like are really like they kind of like give off more of like a like female presence of like, oh, this directly applies to women. I can't think of any examples right now, but it's kind of like the same thing as like boys will be boys, or like things that are like very heavily ingrained in like kind of like old kind of like traditions or practices that are like more gender based, and like kind of that language to like be aware of it, is like really important. And I think going forward, I think like a lot of like workshops like that, or like courses that um like not even just like on a greater scale, and not even on like our scale as like students or like individuals, it really comes from like organizations to like have these kind of like workshops to provide their employees or like anyone else in the community as a way to like understand like, hey, like some of these phrases that you're using are like outdated, and here's better ways to do it, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that answer. Honestly, like I think if people, and especially like male coworkers or any coworkers really who are kind of like saying those things that they really shouldn't be saying, if they were just aware of like, hey, you can get your message across without like without insulting me or insulting
Mhm.
my entire gender, like there's ways
Right.
to do it. And education is absolutely a great way, especially like on a policy level. I find
Mhm.
um, when educating or trying to educate yourself, that burden is often placed on the individual when it really should be on the institution, because that's how the most or the largest amount of people can be reached. Obviously, like as individuals, we have responsibility to educate ourselves, but I definitely thank you, Melissa. Thank you for the virtual class. I definitely agree with that. So I guess kind of in researching your profile and seeing some of the things you're passionate about, I saw that advocating for women in tech is one of those things. So what does advocating for women in tech, first of all, what does that mean to you and how do you do that?
Mhm. Yeah. I definitely think that advocating for women tech definitely means trying to instill kind of like the the mindset. I think like for me, I've worked a lot with like kids coding camps, especially for like younger girls from like in like elementary school, like high school age, and like really like doing more mentorship opportunities with that. I've done with like Canada Learning Code in the past. I've also worked with some workshops at Waterloo for some of their outreach events they have with like, I think like middle school girls, and I definitely think like those kind of events are like really important. I think it comes from, I guess, like my experience, as like a kid, like when I went to camps, and like I went to engineering camps, and I thought this was, wow, this is an awesome experience. That kind of like kickstarted my love of coding. So I really want like for like younger girls in the industry to kind of have that aha moment and realize that, oh, maybe coding is like a cool thing for them. And I definitely think it's like not something we have to enforce onto every like girl out there and be like, coding, you must go into coding, because obviously that's not going to happen. That's unrealistic. Everyone has different interests, but I think it's like there's definitely um there's kind of like this like barrier of entry. I think like you might have seen like some like commercials like this where it's like, oh, a girl's like growing up, and the further she grows up, the more like influences she has in her life, where it's kind of portrayed that like, oh, boys do coding, or like it's more like a man's kind of world in the industry. But like with like camps where it can be like a safe environment for students to learn, and like where it's like really supportive and positive with like other mentors who are like older than them, like for example, like yeah, like people in the industry or like university students or high school students, that are older than these girls, they'll realize, oh, there's tons of women like in like computer science that are older than me that are like having a great time and like really enjoying what they do. And so like I definitely think like advocating for women in tech is like kind of starts from there. I think that's like one of the base points, I think, of being a woman in tech. I think as well, like I've done like some like presentations at some of my workplaces about women in tech, and just like going over statistics of like, so like one example is like right after I went to the Grace Hopper conference, I went back to work, and I basically was like, hey, to like my women's organization at work, would it be cool if I did like a presentation about women in tech and like my experiences, and also like share some statistics and stuff. And they were like, yeah, that'd be super awesome. And so I did a presentation about my experience at Grace Hopper, and at the end, I included a bunch of statistics about like women in the industry, and basically more specifically like the attrition rates of like how many women like leave tech after like a certain amount of years, and why it's really important to have like programs really geared towards women, and kind of like the issues that women face in the industry which cause them to leave. Um, and it was interesting because I think my company at the time was like there were, I'd say probably about like 60% or so men, which was like a lot of the engineering team, obviously, but also like just other departments came out to my presentation. And like for me on my team at that company, I actually it was like, I'd say approximately like 40-50% women on my team, which is like a big amount, honestly. And it was like super awesome to see that. But yeah, so I did that presentation, and afterwards I just had like my coworkers and like other people from other teams and like departments coming up to me like, wow, like I didn't know anything about that, or like I didn't know like these are problems that women faced, or like how many women like even like leave the industry after like X amount of years, because of like issues they face. And like one thing that really stood out to me was one of my coworkers, like who was on, I think, either like the design team, or in like a different department than the engineering, was like, yeah, I used to be a software engineer and I switched out of like the industry because I just didn't want to be in it anymore because it was like really toxic. And I was like, wow, that is you, you're exactly the statistic I was talking about. And that's like crazy to like think about, like how many women like leave because it's just they just feel like they don't belong. And I think that it's definitely a lot about like, again, like bringing it back to the point where it's like I think it's not so much on the burden on like women to like educate everyone. It's a lot for like men to like also seek these opportunities to like learn about this. And I think like holding talks like this, like I think it brings to light a lot of issues that guys might not like seek out by themselves. Like now that they've been introduced to it, I think like now it's like, oh, maybe they'll actually look into it and like realize like some of the issues that women face. And I think I've met like a ton of like awesome allies that have like been at like some of the mentoring events I've had, that also have like the same agenda of like they really want to see women succeed in computer science, and to like raise those rates of like women who stay in computer science and enter computer science. So yeah, I think I guess that summarize it up.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Honestly, just like listening to that, I can just hear like the passion in your voice about this cause, and that's so incredible to hear. And as I remember, this is such like a vivid memory for me as a kid. They had like a hatch workshop, but it was run by all men, and all the participants were male. So I,
Right.
as a 12-year-old kid, I was like, I can't see myself fitting in there. And it's unfortunate that that had to happen, and now we're finally seeing some like active steps towards change thanks to people like you, and thanks to organizations like SuperPOSITRON. So I think that's really great. And also just like educating males who just might not understand what it's like to be a woman in tech, simply because they don't identify as a woman in tech and couldn't really see it from our perspective. So if they were just made aware, then hey, maybe those behaviors or those comments could kind of dwindle out. But I guess I guess we have more work to do, but that's a given. So I guess we only have about 3 minutes left, so I will leave it on this question, kind of a fun question to end off of, in my opinion. So Ariel, what is next for you, and what do you want to accomplish in the future?
Yeah. I guess what is next is I'm approaching graduation soon, which is kind of scary because I've been in school for a pretty long time, with my co-op program being like 5 years. So yeah, I think like going into the future, I definitely think like finding a full-time job is in the books for me. I've done one internship in SF, and I really want to go back to the Bay Area. So I think that's definitely in the future for me as well. Wherever I go, I think like definitely I want to be working with like the like women's employee resource group. I've worked a little bit and like been to some events at like Apple's women's resource group, and like I know that other companies that I've been at have had like amazing experiences with just like having events like for like empowering women and women in tech. And I think that's something I want to continue for like way beyond like even just like the future years, or like my near future years. Just like always kind of having that in mind. But yeah, I definitely think I'm still deciding on like where I want to be like pretty far into the future, but I think like for now I definitely want to be like in mobile development or working at some kind of engineering company. But yeah.
Yeah, that sounds, I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing. It's nice to hear someone who has a goal that's like not super like, oh, like in 10 years I want to be doing, but that's great to have like super
Mhm.
long goals, but it's like really refreshing to hear someone who has like
Yeah.
a short goal that they're really passionate about, and
Mhm.
can see themselves achieving. So thank you so much for
Yeah,
sharing. I
no
know we
problem.
have a minute left. So on behalf of Superposition Toronto, thank you so much for talking with us, for sharing all of your insights and wisdom. I hope the audience took a lot away from this discussion. I know I did. And for everyone I believe I can check the schedule, but after this, we have the Superposition Toronto and Woman in STEM Kahoot, and that's on Discord. And then from 6 to 7, we have an LGBTQ plus hackers discussion on Discord as well. So thank you so much to everyone who attended. And thank you, Ariel, for coming with us and
Yeah.
chatting with us
Yeah.
today.
Thank you, Lauren. This is awesome. Great questions. Cool.